key trends for 2011, obviously we're seeing enormous amounts of political upheaval and political unrest around the world, or obviously the natural disasters, the sort of appalling things that are happening in Japan and in New Zealand. And I think as a result of that, as a consumer trend, we're seeing a lot of people becoming a lot more concerned about what's genuinely meaningful in your life. So rather than sort of the flippant consumption, the sort of iPod generation of the past, we're actually focusing back on what's really meaningful. It's all about your family. It's all about a sense of sort of local community. It's all about sort of growing your own produce and sort of making your own stuff, taking responsibility for your own life. And as part of this, we're seeing brands sort of being involved in initiatives that are a lot more meaningful, a lot more grassroots. In some instances, brands getting involved in sort of social campaigns and in sort of looking to create legal change, various different bits and pieces, but aimed around creating sort of a genuinely meaningful connection with the consumer that's not just sort of a flippant throwing out of a marketing message. So that's one trend. And then the other ones is playfulness. There's an enormous rise, this word gamification, I don't know if you've heard it, but the sort of gamification, which is the introduction of game mechanics into sort of every element of life. So it comes from things like Foursquare, where we game our location, or it comes from websites where we're used to gaming all the time. And I think games are starting to spill over into our real lives in all sorts of interesting ways. And as a result of that, we're starting to see marketing that, on the flip side of the more meaningful marketing, is very playful, very interesting, very sort of very light and very sort of well handled and very kind of easy to engage with and very fun, like genuinely fun and not just advertising fun, because there's a difference between those two things. The most exciting opportunities for advertisers in 2011 and beyond, I think one is the sort of potential of real-time media to forge kind of very immediate connections with the consumer and very one-on-one connections with the consumer. This goes like way beyond CRM, because if you talk to someone on Twitter, it's happening in the public domain and you get to share that information. Nobody shares bits of sort of CRM communication, but people share tweets. The other example that I would say is an enormous opportunity is mobile. We haven't even really figured out where this is going to go. I think we're at the moment, everybody's obsessing about apps and location-based technology and Foursquare and all of these different kind of, and like even banners on mobile, which, you know, sort of depressed me very slightly. But all of these different opportunities on mobile are there, and I think we're only just at the very, very tip of what can be done in terms of a sort of brand perspective, both to build brands, both to generate ROI. So I think if I was a brand owner right now, I would be keeping a very, very strong eye on both of those two things, real-time media and mobile communication. I think in order for brands to succeed in the new marketing landscape, the Contagious mantra has always been, since we started in 2004, is that if you're doing anything, like make it useful, make it relevant, make it entertaining. If you're conducting a service, if you're putting out a sort of utility, is it a genuine utility? Is there a reason for that thing to exist? Is it making people's lives simpler or more complicated just by dint of existing? If it's a relevant communication, are you getting not just the right people, but are you getting the right people at the right time? Because that's really important. And if it's entertaining, is it something that is genuinely entertaining and not advertising entertaining? Is it something that you would watch at? If it's on TV, is it working as hard as the programming that it surrounds? I think there's all sorts of opportunities for agencies to use these new platforms that are available. One is being aware that these new platforms exist would be the first one, which is, you know, it sounds like sort of common sense, but it's actually kind of not. You know, there are new things happening all the time and it's difficult to stay abreast of it all. Two, dedicate a budget to innovation. Persuade your clients to put at least 5% of their budget towards innovative use of new platforms. Because the minute you put a number, like a budget on something, it becomes very, very hard to ignore that number. You actually have to go out and sort of figure out something and innovate. Over the next few years, the marketing landscape's changing an awful lot. I think, like, as we've seen, we're sort of talking just after the tsunami has hit Japan, we're talking just after the earthquake hits Christchurch. Like, the world is a very fragile and interesting place. There's all sorts of political upheaval. The US are about to go back to the polls. The UK, we're politically sort of very interesting right now, in a very interesting time with the sort of big society coming out from David Cameron. All of those trends will start to make themselves felt in marketing, and the ways in which I suspect they're going to affect marketing is, one, in that brands will start to contribute a lot more meaningfully to social initiatives. So in the UK, for example, we're seeing a series of sort of cuts of things like the arts and of things like education and things like health services, and I think there is a gap there for brands to fill, to basically take the role that politics is currently, sort of for economic reasons, unable to do. places like Africa and like India have bypassed the internet entirely and are going straight to mobile. They've just let that stage of technological development, means that we should be looking to them to figure out how mobile is going to work over here. I mean, for example, in Kenya last year, 25% of the Kenyan economy moved through mobiles last year, which is a phenomenal amount. But that is a behaviour that's evolved specifically from emerging markets, that as mobile payments become increasingly interesting over here, we can look to that and we can learn about those delivery systems. So I think one of the things is never underestimate emerging markets, because there is stuff happening in emerging media in emerging markets that I think can be incredibly relevant for here. Trend watching as a discipline has changed enormously over the last few years. It's really interesting that something that was given an enormous boost by the internet, because all of a sudden we had access to a lot more information than we did previously. It's given an enormous boost by the internet, is also being kind of, in a way, sort of slightly hampered by the internet now, because things are moving so quickly that it's very difficult to predict, you know, where the next Facebook would come from, or, you know, where the next Foursquare would come from, or even that Foursquare would be popular at all, and that would be the thing that caught on. So from a technological perspective, trend spotting can be very, very difficult. However, what Contagious does, and I think this is the sort of form of trend spotting that I respond to quite well, is that we try and keep our trend spotting to sort of about 6 months in advance. So you can see, we try and fit in within the marketing lifestyle, so you can see how, like, new technologies, so will location-based technology be big? Yes. Is real-time media very important to brands? Yes, it is. So I think from a trend spotting perspective, what agencies should do is basically keep your eyes open. Trend spotting is something that everybody should be doing, so keep your eyes open, understand the new platforms, understand what's around you, but also be prepared to be flexible and to change your position, because the world is very fragile and things shift all the time. So the next big thing as far as technology is concerned is this sort of trend, I don't know if you've heard this, about the web of intent, which is a sort of fantastic phrase given to the filters that are being applied by big technology companies, or these filters that people are developing in order to make our experience of browsing and parsing and reading the internet sort of easier. So some of the technologies are things like Instapaper, which is an application designed to let you sort of scrape text from any areas of the web and then read it later on your iPad or on your mobile phone in your own time, and Trail Meme, which does something very similar for links. And then you see it coming up in things like YouTube, the watch later button on YouTube. So you basically get to scrape all of this video and like watch it at your own time, so you're not constantly trying to stay on top of content and remember where that content is later on. So the web of intent, this technology is coming up an awful lot. There are a lot of people developing technologies in this sort of vein, and there's a lot of people talking about it. And I think I can't think of a better sort of reason for these technologies than sort of my own life, because at the moment it's not that we have too much information, it's just that we don't trust the filters, and I need filters, as do all of us, in order to be able to pass the internet in a more interesting and a more informed way. So keep an eye out for the web of intent. It's coming up very, very quickly. There is a genuine need for those technologies to exist, and I think as a result of that we're going to see web of intent technologies springing up all over the place to make the way that we read and pass and deal with the internet a lot easier.